Hello everyone. My name is Bridget Riley, and today I'm going to be presenting on Giovanni Boccaccio. So I thought we would start out by just talking about who Giovanni Boccaccio really was. Obviously, he was a writer since we've been studying writers throughout the semester, specifically through these presentations. But there was a lot that went in to Boccaccio's life that shaped his writing and led to him publishing the Decameron. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk about here. So in 1313, um, Boccaccio was born. He was born to a wealthy father and what's said to be a French mother. There is not a lot of information on his mom, but she it's said that she was French. Um, and his father may not seem as important, but I think that it is important to note that his father wanted Boccaccio to study business and canon law, things that were very typical of the merchant class. Um, but clearly, this was not something that Boccaccio stuck with. As we know, he's an author. Um, so in 1332, around the age of 19, Boccaccio moved to Paris. And this was actually to pursue an interest that he had with humanism. Um, and the moving to Paris allowed him to see and get introduced and interact with a lot of people who studied classical literature or mythology, astrology, history, things that weren't the typical business or law that Boccaccio had been used to. And I think that it's also really important to note that in studying the mythology and the astrology, there were these secular ideas that the concept of humanism really focuses on. And I think that moving to Paris gave Boccaccio a really good opportunity to focus on that. It also was the place where he met his mentor, Petrarch. He was the founder of humanism, very famous. Some say that Shakespeare copied some of his work. And he didn't actually meet Petrarch in person until 1368, but moving to Paris and being exposed to all of these different, I guess, fields of study led him to believe that he was passionate about humanism, and he took Petrarch as his mentor in a kind of way. Um, and then in 1348, he moved back to Florence. So in between 1332 and 1348, he did publish various works of poetry and literature, but I just was going to focus on the Decameron for this presentation, just because that's the excerpt I had you guys read, and that was what the focus was supposed to be and what I wanted to focus on. So in 1348, when Boccaccio moved back to Florence, this was during the time when the Black Death was really rampant in Italy, and it was killing thousands of people. It killed Boccaccio's own father, and he actually ended up inheriting all the money that his father had, his family fortune. Um, and then following the plague in Florence and the exposure that Boccaccio had to it, he published the Decameron in 1349 to 1351, roughly. So, after going over a little bit of background about who Boccaccio was, I think that it is super important to just briefly talk about two things that I mentioned on the last slide, and that is one, who is Francesco Petrarch, since he was Boccaccio's mentor, leader, main influence, and what is humanism? Which may seem silly because I'm sure all of us know, but I just wanted to go over it since it's a big part of Boccaccio's writing and Petrarch's influence on Boccaccio. So, Petrarch was born in 1304 and was known as the father of humanism, which he really got by arguing that God had given humans intellect and the potential to be creative. Um, so basically, they should use it. And I think that in doing this, he also took his writing a little bit away from focusing only on the church, and he went more towards those secular ideas that we see a lot in Boccaccio's writing. And I think that's one of the biggest influences that Petrarch had on Boccaccio, but I also think that it's very important to note that Petrarch's influence, kind of on everything, led to the flourishing of the Renaissance. Just because, again, it was towards those secular ideas, kind of away from the church, and he really focused on the importance of creativity while looking at ancient literature. And then for humanism, I just wanted to briefly describe it, and I think that it's really a shift from the organized societal structure that was centered around the church to one that's focused on more secular ideas, centered on the individual person. So again, this is just really highlighting the idea, we're looking at an individual person, what they can produce, how creative they can be, and kind of everyone having a mind of their own, which was not something that we had seen in the past since, as we've talked about in discussion after discussion, the church had a major influence on people's life. So, just one more thing that I wanted to touch on, since it really is the basis for the Decameron, and I think Dr. S might talk about it a little bit, but I just wanted to talk about it as well. So, the Black Death is obviously a global pandemic, which unfortunately we're all familiar with. And this is the deadliest one that has been recorded. Millions died, between 75 million to 200 million people died. It was very easily spread. It started with rats and fleas, and because of poor living conditions and a lack of medical knowledge, it spread rapidly across Europe and the world. So this poor medical knowledge includes the humors, which is basically the balancing of your four fluids, which is, obviously we know today, not very accurate, but they thought that you needed to balance your black bile, your yellow bile, your blood, and your phlegm, and that was how you would cure yourself. Which obviously I think we can all agree is a big reason for how this spread so rapidly with no cure. Just we don't have the same medical knowledge that we do today. And the breakout in Italy in 1348 caused isolation for many, and that's really what inspired the Decameron, and that is the beginning story, the proem that we see. So that's just a little bit of background, and then I'll talk a little bit more about the proem and how Boccaccio describes the Black Death or the bubonic plague in the proem, and how that kind of sets the tone for the Decameron. So I just kind of wanted to pose a quick question. I guess So I just kind of wanted to pose a quick question. I guess get everyone thinking like mid-presentation. This is probably something that we could talk about like in the discussion. But I just was wondering how you guys think that the Black Death, or the bubonic plague, how that compares to what's going on today with COVID-19, and maybe the difference between isolation or the impact that technology has on us. I think that that could be an interesting point of discussion. So the Decameron, um, just as like a little bit of an overview. So it's a collection of about 100 stories that are all prefaced by the same story, known as the Proem. So the Proem basically describes 7 women and 3 men fleeing Florence, Italy, while it was plague stricken, and they left to a small town just outside Florence. Um, and this is really important because not only does it shape the rest of the stories, or at least give a little bit of context to them, but this is also where we see Boccaccio describe the plague. And I think what really stands out, and where we can see this idea of humanism, um, which is also found throughout the other stories that follow the Proem, but I think it's really found in his description of the Black Death. So he not only goes out of his way to depict the high mortality rates, but I think that he highlights how it led to a lot of social and cultural changes within the 14th century. Um, and I think that's something that he does very well in the Proem, Boccaccio, that maybe we can relate to a little bit today, is he doesn't just portray the plague's effect on the physical person, but he describes its effect on the emotional, mental, spiritual states of people. Um, and I think that that is really valuable, and something that's unique to Boccaccio. So I know I didn't really mention it on the last slide, but it was on there. So basically, the Decameron is, after the Proem, is split into 10 days, and each day, each person is responsible for telling a story. So each of these days, the collection of stories has kind of like a different theme that we can look to when analyzing the stories, and a different theme for the story. So I just wanted to quickly go through those. So day one, you definitely see the stories are a little bit more witty, and kind of about human vices. Day two, we're looking at stories that are about fortune, a little bit happier of a tone. Day three, basically it's about free will, humans' free will. And then day four, we're gonna look at tragic love. So we're looking at stories that are a little bit more sad, somber, but still about like love and romance. Okay, so as the days continue, day five, we're seeing a continuation of the theme of love. We're gonna see a little bit happy endings to love stories, as opposed to the tragic love. Day six, we are coming back to the wit and cheer. Day 7, 8, and 9, we're talking about lies and deceit, and we see that theme throughout the story. And then day 10 is the patient Griselda, which is basically where I had mentioned on a previous slide, Boccaccio does borrow, I don't want to say ideas, but he borrows the tale, like the folk tales and the myths, of other stories and includes them in the Decameron.